Hi there, good afternoon, and welcome to our third webinar in this current series hosted by Zamna, the pioneers of persistent identity. Today, we are discussing OneID or digital identity and the interoperability in the travel vertical. And we're asking how you bring the concepts and thinking to life with tangible, measurable, quantifiable value. And we're asking how you do this now. To help me today and to raise the discussion to the point of action, I have three world-class individuals to help unpack all of this potential. Firstly, let me introduce you to Stephen Greenway, who's the former Exec Vice President at WestJet. And he brings his experience in accelerating airline growth and challenging the incumbent approach to IT to drive fast value to customers. Stephen is a seasoned professional in building effective teams and customer loyalty through reimagining of the travel experience, proving that you can truly change the industry at speed and in a cost-effective manner. Then we have Anya Leroux, who is the Policy Director at Airlines for Europe. Anya brings the focus to policy, what to be aware of, where the opportunities are, and spotting the icebergs that might well be looming. Understanding why policy is the way it is can help us in shaping solutions that change the current procedures. And last but by no means least, we have Luca Balbiani. He's a senior manager with Amadeus, focusing on customer solution management. And he will talk of his experience in driving faster change and experimentation through large organizations. And it is apparently possible to be agile in a large corporation. We'll explore that a little bit more shortly. But just to contextualize things so we know where we've got to in our series that we've been running, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves in just a moment, but let's talk about where we've got to. So our previous webinars, we've discussed how far the industry has come with biometrics, automation, electronic authorizations for travel. The technology has proved itself. And then we've had the advent of COVID, unfortunately, which has and continues to rock the industry to its core. This has spawned some innovation, but also seen some domestically charged policies emerging, making travel confusing and even more hard work for our customers who need to spend, or who we love to spend their money. We discussed how digital identity is paramount to driving the revolution that our industry needs. We examined commercial models and customer wants and needs, merging the digital world with the physical world in a much more seamless manner. And our challenge now is to bring all of this experience and thinking together into action that drives sustainable change at a speed and a cost that is manageable too. My personal belief is that this is more than achievable. And what's more, it's affordable. We don't need to do open heart surgery. We need the right understanding of identity and a willingness to act to bring it to life. And maybe then we can truly deliver on the seamless journey. What has gone before is not indicative of what is to come. COVID has proven that. We must be fleet of foot and we must be ultra aware and we must be prepared to adjust to the fast changing needs of our customers. So let's turn to our experts and get their take on how we bring the immediate value of OneID and digital identity to life. They will each start by introducing themselves and shed a little light from their perspective on this particular subject. And whilst they speak, if you've got any questions for the panel, and when we get into the main question time, please do just drop them a live chat question in the YouTube comment or the YouTube chat section that should be available within your stream. If you could also mention who you are and who you work for, that helps to contextualize where that question's come from. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you to these lovely three guests we've got today. Let's let them introduce themselves. Let's start with Luca. Luca, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us how we can start to deliver on One-Identity.
Thank you, Raul, and thank you very much for the invitation. And good morning and good afternoon, depending on where the audience is. So I'm Luca Balbiani, and I work for Amadeus. Amadeus is a leading providing company in technology for travel. and I'm focusing on the IT and solution management in order to help customers through their journey to cloud and digital transformation. So for us, the digital identity is key. It's key in particular in the time that we are right now. Today is the right time because we have the technology in order to boost the digital identity to the next step. And as you mentioned before, we are in the COVID situation where knowing the passenger and creating the personalized experience with the passenger is key, and digital identity allow the airlines, the hotel, and the airport and the other actors to build this one-to-one relation and build trust. Why I say trust? Because today, in this challenging time, the passenger need to feel confident when they travel. And I do believe that we are also in the right situation right now, thanks also to the different initiative going on from the technology perspective and also from the industry perspective. We have initiative right now to simplify the business, one order, NDC, and indeed one ID. And on the other side, we have the technology ready to support this change. And on top of it, we are building from Amadeus, working with our partners, this ecosystem of partnership that will allow the cooperation in order to link the dots and ensure that digital identity really go to the next step and start unlocking value for the customer right now. Back to you, Raul.
Thank you so much, Luca. It's great to hear what Amadeus are doing and how they're actively participating in driving this forward. Let's move on to a policy view, shall we? Let's go to Anya and find out from her what we should be thinking about and maybe what we should be doing next.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Agnès Leroux, Policy Director at A4E. So it's Airlines for Europe, the European Association representing 16 airlines and airline groups. We're representing roughly 70% of the traffic, at least in a normal year, of 70% of the traffic of the continent. So quite a big association. And indeed, facilitation and EID is a key topic for us. Definitely getting more and more political clout in the discussions here in Brussels. That's where EU decisions are taken, obviously. So basically, we're looking at a new European Commission that has started working 18 months ago, and that really wants to make this a digital decade. So clearly we have, political momentum that we can seize, and definitely, as mentioned by Luca already, the COVID-19 has been an accelerator of the focus on digital in the last few months. Definitely, we've seen this also at the policy side. So what we are, really trying to do is understand where are the opportunities for airlines with EID, and how could we reconcile that with the policy landscape in Europe? Could we push forward some solutions? And as you pointed out, how do we make this into concrete action? So that's really a top priority. Concretely, there will be some opportunities in the coming months and years. However, if you talk about European policy regulation and standards, this takes time. So this is where really this is a call today, and thank you, Zamna, for setting up this webinar, because it's a good opportunity for all stakeholders to get into the discussion and participate in really shaping how EID will look like in Europe and beyond for the coming years. Thank you.
Oh, off mute now. There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you, Agnes. Really, really good and insightful. And I hope we can delve into a bit more of what those opportunities might be. like you say, it can be very, very slow, but with the right kind of acceleration from airlines and airports and beyond, we can hopefully put the right sort of pressure and show that these things can really come together and work. So last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Stephen Greenway, who, well, I'll let him introduce himself. Stephen, over to you.
Thanks, Raoul. My name's Stephen Greenway. I recently retired from the WestJet Group. I was EVP at WestJet and president of Swoop, which was their low-cost subsidiary. The company was actually sold to private equity last year, and I decided to exit at that time. It was a good time to leave. But in any case, my background predominantly is startups and turnarounds. Swoop, which was the most recent startup, was my 6th, but I've done Peach in Japan, Scoot in Singapore, and other airlines as well. So just in terms of the digital identity, I think there's a couple of things going on, and if you listen to the conversation that was before, everyone is grappling with what the concept is. It can either be this or it can be this. In terms of what it actually means, and to give some context and flavour for that, particularly with COVID coming in, you're now starting to see governments demand that an identity is also matched with some form of medical record, be it inoculation, COVID inoculation, or what have you. So it's interesting how, depending on where you go, the definition changes quite dramatically. And I think for me, it's, just been in the industry for as long as I have, I think that, there are many advantages to a singular digital identity. We can, from the touch points in terms of the travel journey to compressing the retailing portion of the experience, because you've obviously got data that you can glean on to be able to process the customer faster, et cetera, et cetera. We can all pick out areas, including being on board and the crew being able to tailor make an experience based on what they know. I think the biggest issue that I have, and it's a disappointment for me, is that we've been talking about this for many years in one form or another. I mean, it certainly had different names at certain times, but in terms of a single user identity or whatever the case may be. And there's a lot of talk, but there's never any, there's never really any tangible action from my view, both as a customer, someone who is a frequent flyer who has status on a number of airlines and so forth, all the way through to an airline practitioner. I'm constantly hearing about investment in this area. I'm constantly hearing about new initiatives and so forth, but I can't actually tell as a customer what the difference is. And so, where's the value? So for me, I'd love to have that conversation, explore that a little bit today as well, because even one could argue a P&R is a wealth full of data, but very few airlines actually leverage what's actually in the P&R post-purchase to be able to tailor make the experience, because you've got a lot of data there. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't disagree with the concept. I don't, I think we'll get there eventually. A definition is still outstanding, but I'm also cynical in some degree that, we've had a huge amount of data that can create an identity on a customer, from a frequent flyer profile all the way through to a P&R. And there's very, very few airlines that can honestly say, I've leveraged this in a tangible way that we're benefiting, and also the customer is noticing and recognizing that there is something different.
Thank you, Stephen. Good challenge in there. So let's stick with that to start with. Then let's look at that provocation that you've just given us. Do you believe then that with the advent of COVID coming along, that this is the sort of accelerant or tipping point that the industry needs to actually really shake it to its core and maybe think about some of those fundamentals of taking it beyond proof of concept into actual value?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes and no, and I don't mean to make things complex, but for me, my observation around this is, you had many airlines protesting that they were becoming, digital enterprises that just happened to fly planes, and that was a typical story out there. This is pre-COVID. Emphasizing the work that they're doing in that area, be it from mobile applications all the way through to revamping loyalty, to you name it. Interestingly, COVID's come along, and for all the right and all the wrong reasons, a lot of things that airlines were working on have been thrown out. They were the first things to throw out. Teams being downscaled, all of this type of stuff, investment frozen, and so that's frustrating and disappointing in many perspectives. That's the no part. The yes part is, or that's the no to my answer, and the yes to my answer is that what you are seeing is where airlines are investing or continue to invest is obviously the touchless journey for the customer experience to become COVID compliant or minimize risk and so forth. And you're starting to see, as we discussed earlier, a lot of conversation around identity, potentially mapping that with some health history to get access to certain countries and not be quarantined, those type of things. So you are seeing a little bit, but it really is focusing around trying to overcome the restrictions that COVID have placed on the enterprise, the airlines themselves, as opposed to a more broader digital investment and so forth. So it's a bit of a mix. And to be honest, the first one, in terms of a lot of airlines shutting down certain things, it's understandable. Obviously, cash is limited, but at the same time, a lot of good programs have come to a grounding halt. To get those started again and re-energize is going to take a couple of years for a lot of airlines to be able to do.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, good insight. So I think what we'll do is we'll take that and we'll move that back to Agnes here and talking about it in the context of COVID. So we talk about COVID being an accelerator. So from a policy point of view, are you seeing evidence that within the EU specifically, that now there is a more concerted effort, a more aggressive timeline to seeing some of this digital and medical conversion of data?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think definitely there is some acceleration, although it's not, I wouldn't necessarily call it a total change of gear yet. I think at the policy level, we are really focusing, or we see the Commission and member states focusing on fighting the virus. But nonetheless, this declaration of this digital decade for Europe was made in September by the President of the Commission in her annual State of the Union, and she also made a quite bold announcement that the Commission will propose a European secure ID, digital ID for all. So that's quite a bold proposal. We know some member states are really advanced in that, in particular with e-government, and I'm thinking, for instance, about Estonia. But other countries are really behind. So I'm quite curious to see, whether and how this will be taken forward. So this is one example where clearly the crisis played a role in accelerating also the policymakers' thinking in how important moving forward is. And to come back to what Stephen just said, indeed, airlines do have a lot of data, but so far they're quite constrained in the way they can actually use them. For instance, the PNR data you referred to really are very strictly limited to law enforcement and should simply be forwarded to the authorities. So this is where, those discussions that we have at EU level, but also at the national level, in terms of, data privacy, privacy by design, and all those constraints, which will also inform the discussion moving forward, and might help us go beyond, as you pointed out, some pilot projects, but going to proper implementation. And I would say, indeed, those are very challenging times for airlines, but it will become a very competitive way to distinguish yourself from an innovation that will allow you to distinguish yourself from the competitor. So those airlines who are able either to keep this project going or to restart them earlier than the others might actually see things going better as we move forward. And also because the reality of COVID will be with us for months and possibly years, the narrative around the seamless journey, contactless travel is going to get stronger and stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right there on the money. I think we we can see the importance that the GDPR side of things and the PII side of things bring, and we can see actually almost the threat that comes from the need that will sit around medical data and health data. Specifically, you move from private into sensitive information, which is a different class of risk really for airlines to contend with. And I know airlines are far from keen to actually have to process that data, let alone even hold on to it. Maybe I'll turn to Luca then, just to kind of reflect on that a little bit and find out what's going on within Amadeus to address some of these challenges that are popping up.
Yes, so absolutely, and that is a good question. How we meet with this request. So I personally have 3 ingredients, and then I would also like to share with the audience a successful story that we have in Amadeus. So the first ingredient that we have is thinking about the right time. And this is the right time. Stephen mentioned before that many here we are talking about digitalization and digital identity, and I fully do agree with that. Today we have this simplify the business action on IATA side, on the industry side, with one order, one ID, and DC. We have the technology ready, and we have the customer, the travelers begging for a more digital interaction. We have the retailing player that they set the bar. You think about Amazon, Netflix, you name them. In particular, during the COVID lockdown that all of us experienced, and they set the base for some kind of expectation. So first ingredient, the time, and we are in the right time. The second ingredient is the ecosystem. In every industry, including travel, we need an ecosystem of partner for the service, partner for the content, for the technology, and for the security. And the third ingredient is being agile. Agile in terms of methodology that are used. You think about Scrum, Safe, you name them. Being agile also on the way of setting target and focus on unlocking value. Agnès before mentioned about proof of concept, proof of value, and I do believe that we really need to work with the customer and with the ecosystem of partners to set value to reach a specific target. And this is how we work in Amadeus, and we have a successful story working with Narita Airport in Japan, working with a partner. So the second ingredient, the ecosystem, we work with NEC for the facial recognition, and also working with the Japanese authority. And we build up the Face Express project. So basically, traveler can pop up at the airport and in front of the biometric kiosk and capture the image and match and verify the image with the one on the passport. And then it can go smoothly through the different process, like the auto backdrop to backdrop the luggage, then through the e-gate, the e-boarding. And this is aligned with the social distance that is required today, touchless to avoid to touch any surface, and also human interaction that would be more, let's say, safe and digitalized. And I do believe that, yes, following these 3 ingredients, we can manage to boost the digital identity. And that's what we did with the Narita Airport.
Thank you, Luca. We're having a couple of sound problems coming through there, Luca, but we've got the general gist there. So thank you for that. We'll battle on. Stephen, you've set up a few airlines in your time. So have a think about some of these big legacy airlines, as we like to describe them. You know, can they make these significant changes, do you think? And if so, how do they go about doing that, taking that provocation that Luca has given us to be agile?
Yeah, I think, and I think, Ro, you know where this is coming from, and it's something that I've said consistently over the years. Is I think the biggest impediment to any airline getting progress is an IT department. You know, the great thing about startups, as painful as they are, versus running an established carrier, you start with a clean sheet of paper. And the last couple of incarnations that we've had, or I've done, hasn't had an IT department at all. You might have someone who's a policy advisor for security and so forth, and setting up usage policies and what have you. But to be honest, I think that we have a lot of airlines are set up to fail. That is that a certain business unit wants a solution to do X. They want to do something, let's say. And that typically then is tasked to an IT department who wants to interpret those requirements and then goes out and does the work on behalf of said department and delivers something. But there's so many points of failure in that model and particularly with regard to progress as well. And you just get, internal finger pointing saying, well, I gave it to IT and they failed to deliver. And IT will say, well, they didn't tell us what they really wanted to do. And so for me, it comes down to actually putting solutions and so forth and the ownership thereof back into the business for the business units for the most part. I think that's absolutely critical. My predominant background is in commercial, but I've also had operations and so forth. But if I give it in a commercial context, there should be some guidelines in terms of how you do acquisitions. There should be some standard guidelines in terms of how a particular solution should be supported and housed and so forth as well. But apart from that, the business should be taking complete ownership of particular things and running with that. They own it. They're responsible for it. They know what they want more than anyone else does, rather than having to get some other department to reinterpret what that is. But they can, and by cutting out the middleman, you start to get also an element of speed as well. And it sits on you. There's no blame game. If you don't deliver, and if you don't deliver with a reasonable amount of time, it sits on your shoulders. You can't point the finger at anyone either. So I think structurally, we've got to look at ways of redefining how we go about building in solutions and tackling innovation in a way that it's now run by the business as opposed to a central area, amorphous area that's called IT or whatever you want to call it, that in my mind tends to slow things down. And I know that's controversial in many ways, but I've seen it on both sides. And I fear that IT departments have become these huge monoliths that exist for self-existence in itself, and that's basically it. I think the other side of the argument is I think we've become very, very cautious, very, very scared to make a mistake. Particularly, and that's understandable. I mean, in the environment that we operate in, certainly mistakes can't be made in certain areas like flight operations and these type of things, and that those type of projects and implementations, innovation need to go on a certain way. But there's a lot of areas that aren't safety critical for the airline, for an airline that you can experiment in. But I think we've failed to provide our teams, our people, a safe space for them to be able to execute, but more importantly also to be able to fail and have no recrimination, but to learn to turn the thing around and address the issues when you do fail. I think that our first instance these days with regard to failure is to shoot the person because it's unforgivable, which I would argue otherwise. So I think there needs to be greater confidence in having a safe space that you can innovate within and also fail within. You'll learn much quicker from failure than you do from success. So I think it's a structural and it's also an approach in terms of providing a safe space as well.
Really good and challenging comment there, and you've done it through experience. There's a follow-up question I've got for that, and this actually we can pitch this one to all of you actually. When it comes to innovation, we hear a lot about innovation, and we can go to all sorts of events, and there'll be an innovation track that's running, and the startups will be there, and all the rest of it. But is innovation a department, or is it actually an attitude?
I'll go first, and then to me, it's an attitude. I think that's it's a great question. I loathe companies that have innovation departments. What does that basically mean? That there's an innovation department over there. I'm running commercial. What, I can't innovate? I have to rely on someone else to tell me how to innovate. But it's also a failure because it means that my boss hasn't hired someone that can do the day-to-day and run the business and be relied on to deliver, but also within his or her portfolio be able to innovate. and also work with his or her colleagues, their peers, and so forth, to be able to innovate across the company. So I loathe when I hear these, these type of things. In that I don't think, unlike project management, which you want to set standard across the business and guiding principles that everyone can adhere to, innovation is something that needs to be deeply embedded across the organization, not owned by a singular department who will tell everyone else what innovation is. I loathe that concept. Sorry for being so strong, but it riles me to when I see this, as you probably know. I'll leave the comments to everyone else.
Great, Luca, Agnes, do you want to come on that at all?
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
I had some issue with the sound before. Can you hear me? Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do agree with Stephen. I mean, innovation, of course, there are people in a company and in a big company, of course, that can inspire and bring in some food to think about the innovation. But this needs to be an attitude for all the company, cross department, cross partners, and that I truly believe is the way to move forward. Innovation new way of working, new way of collaborating, boosting new technology, and then for sure is something that needs to be cross department, cross unit. I would also say cross ecosystem. But of course, it's great to have people that inspire and that will set the base.
Great, thank you, Luca. So let's talk about policy. Is it possible to innovate in and around policy? How does policy get created in the first place if there's not a little bit of innovation in there?
Yeah, right. No, I think it's a fair point, and it's an interesting discussion to have also both at national but also European and international level. How do we tackle this specific challenge? Because it's at the intersection of so many topics. And if you take the example of the European Commission, which is organized in directorate generals, which work, as we say, sometimes in silos, like you have the transport, the DG in charge of enterprises and single markets, another one in charge of digitalization. How do you reconcile this? And for the public servants, it's definitely a challenge to find a way to work, let's say, cross silos or cross sectors, and that's where, and I think it's also valid at the national level, where stakeholders, so us, we have something to bring to the table, and where we could bring solutions and also force them to talk to each other. I think it's the same within business departments in a company, and in those departments at the policy level, you need to break a bit the structure. You need to talk to your colleagues to actually understand where they're coming from. Why is the question of data privacy so important, so that you can move ahead. So that's definitely a challenge that our policymakers are facing. But it's getting better, and definitely the current crisis is pushing everyone to do better and try to move ahead. So that will definitely be kind of one of the testing case. Like, can we actually move forward faster? I mean, Stephen mentioned this has been on the table for years. Airlines are trying here and there, but we'll also need, even if it's slow, we'll need the policy makers to get involved, and we will need the regulations, and then we'll need the standards, and that's where we also need to put everyone accountable in a way, because we'll need a European structure that makes sense in order to whichever system, whichever companies, specific airlines, for instance, chooses to go forward on EID, to be interoperable with the other company that is chosen by a different airline. So all the system of different actors will need to be clarified with standards, and on top of that, regulations at the EU level. And what I've seen on other topics is usually that you have one or two, sometimes three member states who really take the lead. So who are at the forefront of the discussion. And there, the UK is quite well placed, actually. So even with Brexit, the conversation will continue, I'm sure. And one member state then kind of shows the way or present one way to go ahead, and that is taken forward, at least is used for discussion at European level, and see whether that can be translated into a international rule. So that's something we'll need to look at collectively. That's definitely an opportunity, but that's a process that takes quite some time, and again, it might mean that it takes longer than what we wish for.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. That policy doesn't pop up overnight, and standards don't pop up overnight, but they've got to have a genesis somewhere. So there's a choice. We can sit back and we can wait for standards to come out, and we can wait for the links to be made, and this is how you do it, or we take action and we do something about it now, and we actually be part of the solution and shape what that could be and how that interoperability could actually take place. So I think the provocation, maybe I'll come back to Luca on this as well. You know, we've done all sorts of trials in the industry over the years. I've been involved in biometric ones in the past, where we've shown that faces can be recognized reliably. You've got the US who've done vast amounts of work with NIST on showing that biometrics from a passenger travel point of view is a reliable and solid technology. We've seen automated gates work in airports. We've seen all that stuff come together. You know, from a proof of concept point of view, the concept is proven. So how do we go from there now to actually look at value? And more specifically, and I think we can send this to Luca and then maybe come to Stephen on this, the value is not just going to be around customer experience. It's not just going to be around a bit of operations. It's going to be across the board, as I see it. You can have a bit of value that will come from customer experience, something that comes from operations, something that comes from a commercial angle, something that comes from a risk and cyber angle. How do you, and what are you doing to help bring that collective view together where you are going to have potentially disparate pulls from within a business?
Yes, absolutely. Now is the value has been proven. I mentioned it before what we have done with Narita Airport. We have done other proof of value, and indeed, Raul, you are aware, and you mentioned that. Now we need to find a way to make this value a proof in order then also to be commercialized. And yes, as you said, the customer experience is key. The confidence that we can give to the traveler to come back to travel is important. But then it's also important a way to make it commercialized from the digital perspective, knowing better the customer, knowing better the needs that they have, and having a digital identity will allow also to boost a sort of sales à la Amazon. In the previous webinar, there was the CEO from Airporter, Randall, that he explained how their product, in order to do the check-in, the allow to do the check-in from the door, from your door, and they take care about all the check-in process of your bag. This is a great product. So is the what, but now how can we leverage the identity to understand better when this product should be proposed and how through these through which channel it can be proposed. And I do believe that we have all the tool and the great product in order to make it commercialized. Now it's just a matter of connect the dot from all the stakeholders and boost this digital identity.
Great, thank you, Luca. We'll come to Stephen then. So Stephen, from your experience of running airlines, how do you do this? Is this going to come from the very, very top? Is this going to come from the CEO level to say, actually, we need commercial, customer, and so on and so forth to actually pull together and to set that vision of how all this comes together for that step change that you might see in the model?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. If I wanted the equivalent to me, or at least the most recent example of, we're talking about singular ID and how that would be implemented at a policy level and an airline level and so forth. I think interestingly, I draw parallels to our experience with NDC, and I don't know we're not talking about NDC today, but NDC, let's face it, should have come much quicker than it did, and that was an industry-led it wasn't a policy piece that was done. We needed government approval, so it wasn't as theoretically as complex as around ID policy and so forth. This was an industry-led, IATA-led initiative that has been going on and on for years, and we're only now just seeing some upside, or at least we were pre-COVID, where we started to see large-scale implementations go in. But what was promised to be a couple of years ended up being almost a decade in terms of trying to get this thing across the line, and we're still yet to see it widely adopted. We're still yet to see the real true benefit of this community-based initiative. So I draw parallels to that, and I look at ID. You would be involving government as another layer of complexity, or absolutely necessary, but another layer of complexity versus what we were trying to do with NDC, and that worries me. It worries me because what I'm observing across the spectrum is, and we've got to think outside the EU. I mean, hopefully the EU can have a singular view at some stage. But what I am seeing across the spectrum is every country's on their own. Every country is doing their own thing, is examining ways, particularly when you've got ID, plus we spoke of the health portion, or a health element that's now looks to be some authorities want to include in that to make sure you've either been immunized or whatever the case may be. That worries me, that you're going to have a very, very, very fragmented approach around the world. And the equivalent that I can think of is APIS, advanced passenger information, that a number of countries started to adopt over a decade ago. That's incredibly fragmented. Japan does something different from Australia, does something different from Hong Kong, does something different from the UK, does something different from the US. It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. And, when you look at reservation systems, they have different modules that are set up to handle specific countries, and you have to opt into these modules at significant cost in some cases for airlines, but also complexity, because every data set you're sending to a country is different. Depending on what that country wants. That's my biggest fear, is that we end up being sort of in this APIS hell with regard to passenger identity and so forth. So for me, I would, my in a perfect world, my view would be that this should be an industry-led piece, that we, like NDC, we come to agree on the specifics of what we're going to be proposing, what actually is it, so we can get our hands around it, and then propose to local authorities and jurisdictions. My bet is I think we're going to be overrun by government. I think that particularly on the back of COVID and getting traffic moving again, there's going to be a set of standards that get imposed upon us. Worse still, that those standards are fragmented, just like APIS is around the world. So the EU has one standard. That's great if you're operating just within the EU. But then if you venture to Egypt or anywhere else, the Middle East, it's different again. So I think that's the greatest fear. I don't really have an answer to it. I hope and pray that EU has a singular approach and can be agreed by all. But there is no guarantee, and virtually no chance of any guarantee of other jurisdictions, other countries having something that is equal to what the EU is going to do. It's going to be fragmented, and I think that's a big concern for us.
Yeah, and thank you for reflecting on that. I mean, and there's no point in shying away from the reality of some of that fragmentation. And we commented before in the previous webinar how COVID has accelerated that. The governments have generally taken a domestic agenda,
yep,
and then reflected that out, and that could end up in paper forms or web forms and so on and so forth.
Yep.
It's a good challenge. The one thing, though, that and maybe we can bring in Agnes on this as well. The one thing that we can consolidate in and around that has managed to last the test of time is passports themselves. Aside from APIS and the complications with that, there is a universal or near universal standard that is the passport. And I think, from a point of view of things the human race has achieved, that is standout in many ways, because we can't agree on what a 3-pin outlet looks like. Obviously, the UK one's the correct one to use, but the Americans go for 2-pin and so on and so forth. We can't even agree on that. There are, I think, 14 different types, but we have managed to converge on a passport. So maybe there is something in there that we need to anchor ourselves and what we do on. And the interesting thing you brought up as well, Stephen, was the bit around NDC specifically. We talk about one order. We talk about selling products directly and making those products more and more available through that world. And I think, Luca, I hope you can still talk to us. You've changed headset now, so you're a bit clearer. We need to bring that one ID and one order together. And it feels to me like the ID side of things that's anchored on a reliable identity that will be around passport that works internationally is the key to unlocking a lot of this sort of stuff and providing an anchor point. And then if I can add a bit to that, how does that work from a customer, from an individual point of view? And maybe it's worth reflecting on self-sovereign identity within that space as well. I've asked you about 5 questions in one there, Luca, if that's okay.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Perfect, much better.
I do apologize with the audience for the bandwidth issue that I have. So hope that now you can hear me well. Yeah, absolutely, indeed. As you mentioned, we have this initiative, One Order and NDC, that are great, but they are really airline oriented. One Order to simplify from a ticket to the PNR, and then NDC to leverage the network and the content with the travel agency. What I do believe that now the airline, they want to boost their retailing approach, and in order to be really customer centric and boost the customer ID, then the One ID is key. So One ID is the tipping point to connect all the initiative that we discussed right now, One Order and NDC, in order to the next step, to leverage the customer, to allow to know better the customer and build this one-to-one relation. And I do believe that literally now is the good moment to boost the One ID, because thanks to the NDC and the One Order, we can simplify the process from the technology and from the business process point of view. And with the One ID and the digital identity, we can literally put the customer in the center of the picture, and then, of course, improve the customer experience.
Thank you, Luca. I'll come to you, Anis, as well on this. So, we're talking about travel here, well, flying specifically. From the digital decade point of view, is the EU seeing this as something much more universal? And should we actually elevate our gaze to say it's not just about travel and borders, but it's about financial, it's about telecoms, it's about things that go further?
Yeah, I mean, that's at least the ambitious plan of the European Commission. I think the president mentioned that with this one digital secure ID, you could, rent a bike and also pay your taxes. So, as I said before, some member states are quite advanced and are including this kind of concept throughout, whereas others are very far behind. So we have to reconcile all this. But maybe coming back to what the colleagues discussed on the added value, I think indeed the proof of concept is behind us. And in a way, we will need to bring the governments, in our thinking with us, and to avoid too much of a top-down, as Stephen pointed out, approach. We might also need to better explain the added value for governments and for national authorities. In your first webinar, you invited the US Border and Customs Agency. I think this, and they see a clear added value, and that's the same for different authorities in Europe and throughout the world. How will this facilitate their work? How digital identification of passengers will, allow them to better control flows while in parallel facilitating passenger journey. I think we have to reconcile a bit better how this is, in a way, a win-win kind of situation, when also on the government side, national authorities would tremendously benefit from such innovation and their real implementation, going beyond pilot projects. Because indeed, I think collectively as an industry, we've been selling the story as a benefit for passengers and for customers. and consumers in general, if you expand the EID to other aspects of the economy. But I think to make our point very convincing, we should not forget the public authorities, the governments from our narrative. They can also make, especially in these times of crisis, save tremendously once the investments are made via this EID ideas.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, you're quite right, and a good challenge there as well. So it's on us to ensure that we're engaging and we're proving value, very much so. We've had a question come in from Elizabeth, who works for an OTA in Germany, I think, setting flights and ground transportation. And the question's for you, Stephen, and it's come through asking, please bear with me. You mentioned how slow the industry was with NDC. Should we therefore wait for OneID, or should we just kind of crack on and help shape that and just throw all our findings back into the pot? We've got to move now, haven't we?
We might be dead if we wait. So I think it's, and I say that humorously, given the circumstances we find ourselves in. But to me, I think it's a combination of things. I think NDC was a slow burner. I think the airline industry fell short in terms of really getting distribution leaders, OTAs and so forth on board, and being able to set up feasible trials with a lot of them and so forth. It did take a lot longer to come up with the standard as well, but not the blame, but I think there's a lot of responsibility on the airlines for not pushing hard enough to get trials in place and so forth as well. But I think that we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel with regard to NDC. When we talk about ID, for me, if I can just talk theoretically about where I see the value is, if you look at what is driving the value behind Facebook, Google, and so forth, is they know their customer very, very well. They have a lot of data on you and me and all of their other users, and that's really where they get their market value from, is this huge amount of data they're able to then on-sell or be able to capitalize on and so forth. And I think we're missing the point here. I think that with regard to customer data and what we can do with customer data as an airline, we have a huge amount of customer data, as does OTAs and so forth as well. The value that we could derive from this if we actually did it properly. And I always say that the litmus test is, you speak to an airline, they say, I know a lot about you. You're one of my top frequent flyers. And, you travel with me 20, 30, 40 times a year. I've got so much data on you, it's not funny. I know when you're scratching your nose. And then you sit there and go, well, why can't you just have one-click purchase? Name me an airline that has even a 10-click purchase based on all the information, knowing my travel patterns, knowing who I am. We all go through the same laborious booking process for the most part, and are asked things that the airline should know about. So, when we talk about the concept of OneID, I'm not dispelling that at all. There are many, many benefits. I like the analogy that I can go to the shopping center and do that. I can hire a bike, I can hire a car, I can go to a hotel, and I can book a train ticket. But when I look, and where I get frustrated about is that, airlines I won't talk about other industries, but airlines are pathetic. And I've been part of the problem, I suppose, but airlines are pathetic at leveraging the customer data we have. So here we're having a debate around a singular identity, not disagreeing with that in any way. Can truly see the value of it if we're able to get the standard right. It's not fragmented from around the world. It's a common approach, etc., etc. Here I am saying, well, that's great. Theoretically, it's great, and I can sort of see it coming in different guises. But we've just been woeful in the first part in terms of just leveraging what we've already got. And so I don't know which OTA the questioner comes from, but think about the data, think about the information that you have on your customers and so forth, and think about the fact that we don't have anything in our industry, from airlines to OTAs to hotels or what have you, that has anything that's even close to a one-click purchase that Amazon does. Why? Where are we failing? It might not be one click, but I have to give my dates about where I'm going and where I'm going to fly to and from. But why is everything else required? If I just get the time frame right and my travel specifics right, what else do you need to know from me, because you already have it, particularly from a frequent flyer. So don't wait for the singular identity ID. I think NDC, we're starting to see some lights at the end of the tunnel, but I still think there is a huge sway of data sitting at our feet about our customers that we can form our own identity around and actually act upon that. And I think that's my frustration, is we're not acting on the data we have. We talk about big data, we talk about all this type of stuff, but when it comes down to actually acting on the data we have in a tangible way, I think we've failed. I honestly do. I think we're falling short.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for being so frank with that as well. And I agree with what you said there. It has been a failure of our industry, and it's happened for many, many years. And the example I often use is the fact that as an individual, I might have more than one passport, but actually representing that passport in an airline system might only allow me to actually represent one passport. And even then, that is just human entered data into a form that may or may not be right. And the work that we've done at Zamna has proved that actually the error rate is frighteningly high in terms of data quality, which then drives unwanted processes in airports to clean the problem up. So you're right, there's gold, and we talk about this as well. There's gold within the data. It's mining that gold is really, really hard when you don't know who the individual is, and it's disparate and it's splintered and it's split out. So we think that identity is key and needs to be anchored really well and be accurate, reliable. But it doesn't need, like you say, it doesn't need to actually wait for standards. It just needs to be known as correct, and then the interoperability can play out from there. I'm very conscious of time. We've just got a few minutes left, so I want to give you each 60 seconds just to give your parting shot, really. And to say thank you to each of you. So, Luca, I'll come to you first. Reflections on the last hour, your last 45 seconds.
So thank you very much to all of you. I believe that there are very good input and very good food to think forward. And yeah, the point is that there are standards in place. There are industry that share standard. But as also Steven said, we have data are gold, and we need to be able to streamline all this data from the different actors, hotel, airport, and airline, in order to build as a digital identity, following, of course, also the standard, the One ID standard, but we need, of course, to add now and leverage now the tons of data that we have.
Thank you, Luca. Great stuff. And yes?
Yes, I would agree with that. Maybe on the more positive side, despite the COVID-19 crisis, I think this could be really an opportunity for airlines, and as A4E in Brussels, we'll definitely try to take that as an opportunity and push for this forward. So I'm focusing on the policy and standards, so I will look at that, but I obviously agree with Stephen and colleagues here. So it's a call for our listeners, viewers, to also participate in shaping the policy debate, as this should accelerate further how we adopt EID.
Thank you so much. And Stephen?
Well, it's been an interesting afternoon. I'm going to have a glass of wine and mull about what's being discussed a little bit more, much to the madness of my wife. But for me, I think the key takeaway for me, as I look at what is going on with our industry, truly, 25 years, it's been devastated. But I think that, for me, from crisis comes opportunity, as Michael O'Leary says, and other operators as well. I fear that, with all the discussion that we've had, which is all valuable and something that we should be pursuing, I fear that airlines are just wanting to go back to the way they were. You often hear quotations from CEOs and so forth, just sort of saying it's going to be another 2-3 years to where we were pre-COVID. And it's like, no, don't even talk about that. Talk about what you can now potentially be. which is going to be potentially vastly different from what you were. And that just doesn't mean about passenger types that you're carrying and what have you and where you fly. It means how you do things as a business. And I think that it is understandable a lot of airlines are just simply focused on trying to survive. I get that. I've been in that environment. But equally, this is a golden opportunity to, every airline is like a startup again, almost a clean sheet of paper in many respects. Have a look at that, take that opportunity to be able to say, sure, we were doing things differently pre-COVID, but let's strip out all of the things that we, were wasteful. Try to look at different ways of doing things. Take this opportunity to be reborn, and that's what I would like to see of the industry. I think any airline that's just hoping or praying that we go back to where we were, we'll just find ourselves in the same conversation in the next couple of years in terms of underserving ourselves and falling short compared to our peers in other industries like Google and so forth, that which would be disappointing because we haven't taken this opportunity to really be able to re-image and remodel what we should be doing in the future.
Fantastic, Stephen. I couldn't have said it any better myself. You've heard the charge then, folks. We need to get out there. We need to be brave. We need to get on and we need to do it. It just leaves me to say thank you to Stephen, to Anya, and to Luca as well. Thank you so much for giving up your afternoons for us. And we'll say goodbye and we'll see you in the not too distant future on another Zamna hosted webinar. Take care for now, folks. Goodbye.